And then in 2000, we found out, unfortunately, as these things go, my dad had cancer. He was going to die. We were filing 750 tax returns a year. We were embroiled in what turned into a 33-year battle with the IRS. And I realized immediately, oh my gosh, I know nothing. But one of my first questions is, I don't know why we have 750 entities. How can I take them apart if I don't know why we had them? And in my view, in families, it's communication, communication, communication.
Welcome to the Purpose Driven Capital Podcast, where we help you align your money with your mission and maximize your impact. Here's your host, Matt Johns.
The loss of a beloved family member is hard enough. But can you imagine taking responsibility for 750 business entities overnight? That is Josh Kanter's story and the genesis of his company, LeafPlanner. While to many this may sound like merely a first world problem, the reality is these 750 entities affected a lot of people, from other family members to employees to clients to investors. Thousands of lives were dependent on him handling these decisions prudently. Now, as you'll hear, nobody in the world should have been more equipped to take this on. He's a securities attorney who has experienced leading large companies and had a close relationship with his father. He should have had it all mapped out. But when the moment came, he still felt like he didn't know what to do. Challenges like this aren't linear. Over time, he had to create systems that help make sense of all of these connections. He figured out how to start from purpose and then manage family relationships, and ultimately steward the wealth and the responsibility it brings. I should also mention that all of this is happening while he's in the middle of a 40-year legal battle that ended up at the Supreme Court. I really enjoyed getting to know Josh and his incredible story, and it's a joy for me to get to share it with you today. Welcome to my conversation with Josh Kanter.
And then in 2000, we found out, unfortunately, as these things go, my dad had cancer. He was going to die. My dad was one of these guys who, like, work was his hobby. He didn't play golf. He didn't run. He didn't, he didn't ski. He worked. He loved his work. And he was 70. We find out he's going to die. This is a guy we thought would have a heart attack at his desk at 100. And that's when we would lose him. And here he is leaving us 30 years earlier than we thought he was going to. So I left my law practice. My law firm was really wonderful and let me stay affiliated both with the firm and physically in the firm. But I gave up my practice and came to help my family navigate through the traditional loss of the patriarch. And we were 3 generations of the family, 3 branches of the family, kind of, if you look at that sort of family architecture, if you will. So we were surrounded with complexity. We were filing 750 tax returns a year. We were embroiled in what turned into a 33-year battle with the IRS that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Started in 1979, didn't end until 2012.
33 years?
33 years.
Oh
and that's only that iteration of it. The IRS had started pursuing my dad. He was audited every year from 1964 to 1994. So he gets out of law school, I think, in 1952. By 1964, he's got a target on his back. He was indicted criminally in the mid-1970s by the Internal Revenue Service. And then in 1979, having failed, they started to go after him civilly. So this civil case starts in 1979. He dies in 2001. So actually, it's kind of interesting. In 2000, when we find out he's sick, in January of 2000, we found out this tax case had gone to trial in 1994. The opinion for that tax case did not come out until January 1st of 2000. So when I tell this story with pictures, you'd see a picture of the New York Times article dated January 1st, 2000. And you probably remember we all were waking up January 1st, 2000 to whether the world was still going to exist because of white, right?
Yeah.
And we went up to this New York Times article.
Oh my gosh.
For this case that went back to 1994 saying Bert Cantor is the architect of this massive tax evasion scheme. So we're starting to think about appealing this tax case January 1st, 2000. And in May of 2000, we find out my dad has terminal cancer, the one guy who knows how to fight this case, right? So I come in again to kind of help navigate through all this and manage the team of lawyers and everything else. And he dies 18 months later. With respect to the tax case, we are just starting to appeal and he's dead. So I'm now in charge of, I had a team of lawyers, by the way. I had more tax lawyers than I knew existed, but I had a team of lawyers. But
yes,
I'm the one orchestrating, right, this whole thing. And to your point, pretty quickly after my dad died, I like to jokingly say it was within minutes of his death, people started asking me questions. I'm a lawyer. I took my dad's estate planning class in law school, and I spent 18 months with him, which was obviously a huge emotional gift to get that 18 months together, but irreplaceable in terms of just the download of information.
Yeah.
And I realized immediately, as you said, oh my gosh, I know nothing. And if I know nothing, my mother knows less than nothing. My sister knows less than nothing. My brother knows less than nothing. My wife knows less than, like, everybody else knows way less than I do. And so that's really what prompted us to say there's got to be a better way. Where's the industry letting us down? Because nobody was asking the right questions, or at least all the questions. I won't say we weren't asking the right questions, right? We weren't asking all the questions. As I said, that led to this development for us first, just for our own family, of this thing that we called the owner's manual. And then 20 years later, that became Leaf Planner. As we said, hey, or at least as I said, how do I now at this stage of my life take 35 years of life lessons and go help other families? Because it's really, why do families struggle with these things if they don't have to? That was really the impetus behind. And again, obviously, that I'm not a 30-year-old tech entrepreneur. I'm today a 63-year-old family office executive, former lawyer turned entrepreneur, not because, I don't want to say there's no profit motive here. Of course there is. But at the same time, this was what do I want to do with this next chapter of my life to say, how do we help other families avoid this? Hopefully no other families sitting out there with 750 tax returns, but there are lots of families sitting out there
Yeah. Of
with multiple cars and multiple houses and multiple insurance policies and multiple trusts and
course.
multiple investments. And life has just gotten complex. And so how do we help them make sure they don't have their version of what I went through?
Right. And there are few people in the world who can ever claim that they are even remotely equipped like you were in that moment to help solve their problems.
Right.
And how many families existed before this that are probably still dealing with those problems because they weren't untangled before they got to that point.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I just think of all these people that are probably just breathing a sigh of relief that they don't even know how relieved they should be as a result of all that.
Right.
But I'm just thinking right after his passing, you not only had to unweave all this and deal with all this, you were dealing with the what eventually became a Supreme Court case, and you're learning everything about this process and about the incredible intricacies of all this. So take me a little bit through that process too, of what that was like as you're untangling this. You're going through that court process, and what are you learning along the way?
Yeah, I'd say there's really, there's all kinds of threads there that are sort of parallel threads or paths, right? So first of all, the tax case launches. Again, it's underway by the time my dad dies, but we're just starting that appellate process. And again, like, I don't know anything I'm not a tax lawyer. Like, I don't know anything about, in fact, there's the generation skipping tax, the GST tax. And for me, I jokingly used to say there's also a generation skipping gene, because I don't understand the tax side of this at all. So I'm at this huge deficit of knowledge. And again, even though I took my dad's estate planning class in law school, I think I got a B. So at least I passed.
That's good. Yeah.
It was not pretty. So because of the way the tax court appellate process works, we had 3 petitioners in the case, my dad and 2 partners. And so we end up, for anybody who understands the US court system, the tax court appeals directly to the appellate courts, the Circuit Court of Appeals in the United States. So we had to go to the 5th, 7th, and 11th circuits.
Oh, my word.
Which then went to the Supreme Court, which then went back to and we won at the Supreme Court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote our 7-2 winning opinion. So that's also a little badge of honor.
Interesting. Yeah.
It then goes back to the 3 circuit courts, goes back to the tax court, goes back up to the 3 circuit courts before it goes away. So we get that first tax court opinion in 2000. We're in the Supreme Court by 2005, and it's still 7 more years, even though we won at the Supreme Court level. It's 7 more years before it's resolved. The final thing was in 2012. So anyway, so that's going on. So I'm learning about all that. But that has an impact on the rest of this too. So I mentioned the 750 tax returns, for example. And one of my first goals is to simplify. We had 5 full-time accountants sitting and doing nothing but filing tax returns. So one of my first goals is to figure out how do we simplify this enterprise structure. But
Yeah.
one of my first questions is, to your point again, oh gosh, I don't know why we have 750 entities. How can I take them
Yes.
apart if I don't know why we had them? Now, again, parallel paths. I'm in litigation with the Internal Revenue
Hmm.
Service. If I make a mistake,
Oh
what do you
gosh.
think the chance is that they're going to say that was an honest mistake versus you're just continuing your father's
Hmm.
MO, whatever, right?
Not a
And
lot of
we've
grace in that situation, right?
since 1964.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'm suddenly realizing I don't have the context of why these things existed. And it took me, for example, and this goes back to the heart of Leaf Planner and this whole idea, is it took me some number of years to realize that the fact most of those entities, there were no LLCs yet in those days, right? And so most of these were trusts. And when I had to figure out why do we have 750 trusts? Because today most people are going to say you have trusts, it's about estate planning. Well, back in those days, it was not. And this was all part of, if you went back to the tax code of the 1960s and 1970s, there were income tax reasons that you might have created these, mass arrays of trusts. Well, I'm a lawyer I actually came out of law school in 1987, but this is now in the 2000s. I don't know anything about the tax code of 1960. So how am I supposed to, again, it's all this if you don't have history and context, what are you going to do? So I start learning all these lessons about how do you pass along not just again the true EQ of why is this painting important, but to me, not it's actually not important at all. It's why is it important to me?
Sure.
But also the context of why were these things done? How were they done? How do you educate family members and trustees and executors about these things? And that's where I would say this hopefully resonates with everybody because it's not about having 750 entities or a 33-year battle with the Internal Revenue Service. We all have things. We all have grandma's memento that we want to know where did that come from. We all have the story. We all have lost a mother-in-law, father-in-law, this or that or whoever, and realized, look at all the things that we don't know. That's where I guess pulling on all these threads started to come from and saying there's no solution out there for this.
Yeah. And so hence was Leaf Planner. But even before Leaf Planner, you started individual consulting with families too. And I think that one of the things that I've come across a lot, and I think you alluded to directly, was it's almost never about the structures or the money
Right.
or anything. It's about the relationships, the
Yeah.
people, the purpose behind everything. And you've mentioned that consistently through this story too.
Yeah.
So when you started having those conversations, what were you realizing at that time too? Because did they approach you or were you approaching them? How did that come to be?
Well, so I was running our family office and because I was in Chicago, maybe it would have happened anyway, but I stumbled onto, you probably know, a group called Family Office Exchange. And so I
Sure.
stumbled into Sarah Hamilton, the founder of Family Office Exchange, and Sarah and everybody at Fox kind of took me under their wing, I like to say, and started my lifelong education in this family office and family dynamics kind of space. And what I realized is, again, I was pretty well educated, obviously, as a lawyer and around issues around finance and things like that. So the balance sheets weren't throwing me, the operating agreements and the trust agreements weren't throwing me. I mean, yes, it would have been helpful to have more of that context that we were talking about.
Mhm.
But it was really a fascinating look into this world of multi-generational wealth and multi-generational relationships and how you perpetuate this. And again, frankly, just the first time I'm probably really exposed to the importance of purpose. And not to say that I didn't understand there needed to be purpose in
No,
my life,
understood.
but money's purpose, right? And starting to really hear things like money can be an accelerant for good or for bad. It doesn't really matter. It's if you don't understand purpose, then how do you keep these families together? And so I really found that I dug into it. I became, kind of the quintessential lifelong learner of that space. I started following Jay Hughes and Dennis Jaffe and Jim Grubman and, all the kind of iconic folks in the space and reading everything I could and learning from everybody I could. And now I'm just like so excited at this part of my life that those are all my colleagues, right? And I get to call them colleagues instead of,
Fun. Yeah.
just these people who I was reading on a bookshelf. And so at some point, actually after that tax case went away, I said, I want to continue to help my family, but I'd love to go help some other families too. And so I hung my shingle and I said, how do I I'm open for business if anybody wants to hire me. Unfortunately, a few families, showed up and said, yes, we'd love you to help us. And I was doing kind of a combination, I'd say, of general advisory work, not as a lawyer, right? Just as a more a general advisor to families. Although I think it's interesting because it had a lot of the people who do the work like this in the industry, come from such varied backgrounds. There's people with philanthropic backgrounds or people with therapeutic backgrounds or lawyers or accountants or whoever it is. And for me, there was a real connection to my work as a corporate lawyer, because to me, the best thing I could do as a corporate lawyer, forget the security side, right? On the security side, it's like you follow the rules. On the corporate side, it's, hey, Matt, let's talk about what your goals are and your objectives are, and let's find the answer that's right for you. Because the answer that's right for you is going to be different than the answer that's right for the next person or for me. And so my job as a corporate lawyer was to make sure that you understood the myriad of solutions that you could grab from. And my job was to get you to the right solution for you. And so that to me was very similar to the work I was doing with families as a general advisor, was to say, again, let's go back to purpose. Let's help the family figure out what's their purpose. Do they have a purpose? Because it's also, I would say, okay to not have a purpose or a shared purpose. So how do we help families find that purpose, articulate that purpose? And then how do I help the family get to what the right answers are for them? And I just love that work because, again, there's always an element of education, engagement, empowerment. Families that are coming into wealth for the first time. I mean, obviously, it's one thing to be truly multi-generational and be one of those subsequent generations, but for those first and second generation families, they may not even know the questions to ask. So how do we help them through all of that? And the owner's manual, this was still the owner's manual, it wasn't Leaf Planner yet, right? Was we found a great tool to help through that process and to help reinforce the education we would do. Because if I do a whole meeting with you and your kids about estate planning, that's going to go in one ear and out the other. But if I can give you the tools to reinforce that when you're ready, that's really powerful, right? Because it's not just about when Josh is in the room. It's about when you're ready to sort of receive that information. So anyway, so I jumped into that world, and then now that's led to Leaf Planner as well.
So it sounds like whether a family had a purpose, an explicit purpose or not, you had to find that foundational piece for them. And really, it sounds to me like that was the crux of the value you were providing at that time. It wasn't about necessarily creating the owner's manual or anything else like that.
Right.
That was certainly the outcome that everybody needed and was seeking. But really, the true value you brought was centering everybody on whatever that foundational piece is that they could all gravitate toward and everything could point toward. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it very much was, and again, I mean, I'm building my own practice and my own iteration of this on the work of others, right? I want to make sure we're giving credit where credit is due. But yes, it was absolutely helping families understand, again, do they have a shared purpose? What are those purposes? How do you take that to, for example, Jay Hughes's work of bringing spiritual, intellectual, human, and social capital into the picture? So it's not just about financial capital. And in fact, in Jay's description of these things, the financial capital sits at the bottom of that pile, simply supporting all the other family capitals, right? You've got work of people like Dennis Jaffe, who I just love. He's got a paradigm talking about moving from paternalism to partnership. And I love that, especially with first generation families who are just beginning to think about, you can use words like governance, but governance is a really complex word for most people if they're not from the business world. And so this idea of how do you bring family members into shared decision making? How do you do all these things? And so, yeah, for me, it was really just helping to guide families into better decision making, into finding that shared purpose if there was one. And even on the estate planning side, I think it's so interesting because, I don't mean this disparagingly, but most estate lawyers, they're focused, and rightly so, on tax minimization because that's what they're being hired to do. But they're not hired necessarily. There are very few across the country that I've come across who are really good It actually also saying, well, let's talk about your wealth purpose. And how do you marry that into your estate planning so that your estate planning is about more than just tax minimization? And if that's your purpose, by the way, okay, that's all right too.
Sure.
But if you have a broader purpose, how do you bring that forward? Right.
Yeah. Now you mentioned, I think you said parentalism to partnership was that one of the paradigms that you were working within, but there've
Yeah.
got to be a lot of challenges, especially when you talk about next gen and all that kind of stuff. What are the biggest challenges that you encountered that were kind of a common, let's not even say are a common theme
Yeah.
among a lot of the families that you're talking to?
I think there's some really simple common themes. So first of all, I ended up unintentionally, but I'll say with a little bit of a niche in the first generation wealth creator space. So I do work with families that are at, like there's a family I've worked with that's at their eighth generation, 178 family members, like
Oh
lots and
my.
lots of generations and people. But a lot of the work I've done is at that first generation, first, second generation transition. And so I think there's always generational transition issues. I'll say that's one of the big hurdles because the senior generation, whether it's first or seventh, it doesn't really matter. I would say is never really quite ready to let go, is never fully entrusting to the subsequent rising generation, right? So that's certainly um, an issue. How to again bring people into that decision making process is always a difficult issue. I think the wealth industry in my tenure in it, I'll say over the last 40 years, has made great strides, right? I mean, again, the work of people like Jay Hughes is just it's remarkable what that's done to the industry and changed the perspective of financial capital to the rest of these, family capitals. But the industry still is pretty negatively focused, right? It's very pessimistically focused. And so, there are very few rooms that I walk into to talk about these kind of things where the first comments that come up is I don't want to ruin my kids. I don't want trust fund baby kids. Well, of course I get that, right? I mean, that's not illogical. But I think part of that is being driven because we're not being pushed by optimism, which we are naturally optimistic as human beings. But the wealth industry is like pounding at us this pessimism of, I don't know, your kids are going to be worthless. They're going to be trust fund babies. You're going to lose your wealth in 3 generations. All these really negative messages that surround us in the industry. And so, there's some work out with this new book, Wealth 3.0 from Jim Grubman and Dennis Jaffe and Kristen Keffler, trying to bring a more optimistic bias to the work that the industry does as we enter sort of what they're calling
That.
Wealth 3.0.
You're right. There are a lot of negative connotations with wealth in general. I guess you could say. I mean, despite the comfort that it can bring, there are incredible complexities and challenges, and that's what you deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Now, are there
Yeah.
any really good success stories that you've had, or any folks that you had to walk through a journey with them, and then taking them to
Oh, yeah.
whatever that promised land is that they were hoping to get to?
So one thing I want to say, to anybody who's embarking on this journey, I mean, it is a journey, right? This is not you don't have a family meeting and everything is solved. You spent years or decades building your business. I like to tell people you've got to separate the family business from the business of the family. And if you're not investing the time and resources into the business of the family in the same way you did into the family business, why are you expecting a different level of success? And so it is a journey to your point. But yes, I mean, I am very proud of, I guess, both the work I've done and the results that I see. And, I think it really opens families' eyes to the possible. I've seen 20-year-old kids write a wealth purpose statement for a trust that will make you cry. I've seen families change their governance and again make this evolution from paternalism to partnership and really involve the entirety of the family or the kids or refocus their even identify their wealth purpose again, and why is it important. I don't know that I have a lot of things. Unfortunately, at the moment, I've got a family I'm struggling with a little bit, but I would say other than that, um, I'd say, yeah, it's just filled with success stories of helping families get to, and one of the reasons I guess I'd say, Matt, for that to me is that I always say to people, I'm not a parenting expert, right? I have two kids. I think they are fabulous kids. I adore my children. I think they're responsible. I think they're just great. Like I literally don't know I could ask for anything better than our two kids. But that doesn't make me a parenting expert. That's two data points. When it comes to families, I've worked alongside hundreds, right? And so I do think I'm a family expert, and that's different. And so it's for me to help families navigate these issues that they've never seen before, that they don't know where they are in that journey, it's wildly rewarding. And I think it results in more times than not, for sure, really great success.
Yeah, you've mentioned the transparency continuum. I'd love to get just a brief overview of what that means, because I think it's a pretty fascinating concept.
I've never heard anybody else talk about this, so maybe lots of people do in different ways, and I just don't know. I think that when I work with families, there's always this issue around transparency, and I think people tend to think of transparency as a very binary issue, which generally means, am I showing the kids the balance sheet or am I not? Um, and in fact, there's a family I worked with a few years ago, or still work with, but was working with a few years ago, and I first met with mom and dad, and as we were talking, and they said, we're really concerned because we're not on the same page at all. I was like, okay, let's talk through that. And by the time we finished this first conversation together, which was several hours, but this first conversation together, I said, well, you guys, I got to tell you, there's actually, from my perspective, hearing you two, there's very little light between you. And it really was about this transparency issue. Mom wanted full transparency on the balance sheet and dad did not. Outside of that, they didn't disagree about anything. And so that's kind of really where the beginning to me of this idea came, that transparency is a continuum. It doesn't have to be about the big reveal of the balance sheet. You can have transparency about what's my purpose, what are my values. You can have transparency about why did I create this trust, or what's this trust for, what's its purpose. You can have transparency about how we're going to make decisions together. You can have transparency about all kinds of things long before you get to the balance sheet, or at least the actual balance sheet. So that's what I refer to as this transparency continuum, and trying to make sure, because I think it shuts people down. It stops people from starting the conversation, because they think if I open this door, I've got to give my kids the balance sheet, and that's not true. And so while I might encourage you to give the kids the balance sheet, you can take that at your own pace, if you will. And I don't want people to not open the door simply because they're wrong about or they think that means they've got to do something that they're not yet ready to do. And then they're losing all this time to actually start those conversations. It's such a loss, an unnecessary loss, because of a misperception of what transparency means.
What do you think the most misunderstood things are, people looking in from the outside on these family dynamics that they may see publicly, or even in their interpersonal relationships? What do you think are the most misunderstood things from the outside looking in?
Wow, that's really hard. I mean, look, it's so easy to be like, oh boy, I'm going to get myself in trouble. It's so easy to look at this as a problem of the 1%, right? Or to look at this and say, oh, why would I feel? I mean, I was quoted in a Wall Street Journal article the other day, and I stupidly went to look at the comments. And, I mean, it's like, oh, I wish I had that problem kind of thing, right? Okay, I get it. I get it, right? You're dealing with problems, but there's still problems. There's still difficulties. So I think you've got kids in families of wealth who, again, first of all, I'll say there's a huge parenting problem that first you got to get through, of how do you raise these kids to have the right values, to not, if you're going to fly your kids around on private planes and then you wonder why they're saying, Daddy, why is there a stranger on my plane when they get on a commercial airplane?
Right.
Then you got to look in the mirror, and that's a parenting problem from my perspective. But I think it's hard to hide, right? It's not like you should be, in my view, if you've been successful and you want to enjoy your life in an appropriate way, whatever that means to you, then I think there are all kinds of problems. Rising gen or younger family members who are, everybody always assumes that they should pay for everything, or that they should be able to contribute from their, again, forget whether the actual word private foundation is involved or anything else, but that they should be able to make a donation or anything else. So learning boundaries is really, really hard for some of these people, or even knowing, there's a whole books about this for people who are actually trained in therapy as opposed to, or in psychology, as opposed to me, who's not, right? But of people who, never can get comfortable with whether their friendships are real or their friendships are because they have money. I mean, there's real challenges and real problems that kids have to face. And there's a whole book around the idea of growing up in the land of giants, and which I would argue, is something that I faced. I mean, my dad is like this monumental character. He's not a household name like so many others are, but he's a pretty monumental character in the space in which he and I operate in. And so, growing up in the shadow of that kind of persona is hard. I mean, there are a lot of things that I would say are very real challenges if you're willing to strip away the, oh, woe is me, you're rich.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot of serious challenges.
So, but the challenges are there for all families, all demographics are just different. They're very different. And I'm just curious, from your human perspective, is there any piece of advice or a lesson that you've learned that you think would be valuable to families across the board as they're thinking about these kinds of issues, especially generationally?
I mean, the biggest piece of advice I always give everybody is, in real estate, there's that the phrase location, location, location.
Mm-hmm.
And in my view, in families, it's communication, communication, communication. There's no such thing as over communicating. There is only under communicating. And that is about whether we have money, how much money we have. Again, to your point, across the spectrum, because I talk to my kids' high school, college counselors who will say, you don't understand how many kids will go apply to schools, get into a school that then their parents have to say, we can't afford to send you, right? If you're wealthy and your kids are Googling how much you're worth or what your house is worth or what this is worth or what that's worth, there's a good chance it's wrong. And being wrong is a problem whether they're low or whether they're high. So
True.
You think you're hiding something from your kids? I'm not convinced you are. And if you are, you may be hiding, wrong word in this day and age, disinformation,
Sure.
right? So yeah, I think communicating is at the heart of, it's at the heart of fairness. It's at the heart of when mom and dad are gone and you can't ask them that question anymore. It was obvious why I was the executor of my mom and dad's estates, right? I'm the lawyer. Mm-hmm. I was still in Chicago, whatever. Mm-hmm. But a lot of families don't even describe, and I've got a brother and a sister, which I think I've said. So among the three of us, it's really important that families communicate about why was I made the executor, or why was I the trustee, or why was my sister the healthcare power, I don't remember if she was, but let's assume my sister was the healthcare power of attorney holder. Is that because she's a better human, that you trusted her? Whatever, describe it, talk about it, communicate about it.
Fascinating.
Family problems almost always come from a lack of communication.
Josh, this has been awesome. Really, really enjoyed this. And thank you for this great conversation. We really appreciate it, and certainly wish you all the best. And I hope this is not the last time we chat in the near future.
I sure hope not. Thank you so much. And it's been a really fun conversation.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Purpose Driven Capital podcast. If you found this valuable, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Are you ready to align your money with your mission? Discover the Purpose-Driven Capital Framework, access practical tools, and build meaningful connections to grow your movement and multiply your impact at purposedrivencapital.co. The views and opinions expressed in this show are solely those of the individual speaking and do not reflect the views or opinions of Honey Hive Capital, any broker-dealer, investment advisory firm, or its sponsors. The content is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing in this content, nor any communications from it, should be treated as constituting financial, investment, legal, tax, or other advice of any kind, or as a recommendation to buy or sell an interest with respect to any investment. We look forward to you joining us next time.